Well, hello there. This is going to be a very different episode of Out of Touch from what many of you are used to. I decided to have a chat with a college roommate of mine that I had not spoken to in about 7 years. And I think it ended up being a really good conversation. And I'm really excited to use it for this week's episode. So I'm going to keep this really short. So without further ado, here is my friend from Western Kentucky University from all the way back in 2017, Mr. Alec Zaffiro. I want to go ahead and compliment you on this first. So I was very hesitant not to reach out to you. So I've been wanting to reach out to you for a while because I saw that you were doing the whole Gimme the Keys stuff. And I remember back whenever we were briefly roommates, I remember you had just started. Was it the same thing? It was a blog called Gimme the Keys, right?
The blog wasn't called Gimme the Keys, but I was just getting into music and writing. Like I was just on the cusp. I mean, that was back in 2017. So that was a while ago that we were briefly college roomies.
Yeah, it was weird. So you were my first roommate. I only ever had two roommates before I went into the wonderful world of being an RA at Western Kentucky University. And I remember for you, I was kind of like just a backup plan. You were trying to get your own little room by yourself, right? That was kind of the initial thought process for you.
Yeah. So I was a senior and I was not happy to be in the dorms like my senior year. So that was like not the best. And I really wanted to get a single dorm. I wanted to have my own dorm to myself because I was taking the spring semester off. And so for the fall semester, I was like, it'd be great just to have a semester to myself, have my own space. And Western's policy was that I had to get paired with a roommate first, a random roommate, which was you. And so kind of going into that, it didn't matter if like it was a good or bad roommate. I was just like, I was set on getting my own room. But yeah, so we were roommates for like 2 weeks or so.
Very short amount of time. And then I ended up having that room to myself for maybe about a month, had another roommate for a semester or two. And then, as I mentioned earlier, did the whole RA stuff. And then that was about the extent of you and I saw you a couple of times here and there, but thanks to the wonderful world of social media, of course, it's a lot easier to keep up with people whenever, especially people like you and I that are in this kind of creative space. Even if it's not something that ends up being, something of monetary value, at least in the humble beginnings of it, it's been fun to kind of just see from afar the different things that you've been kind of partaking in. Because one thing I remember about you, I think you were an accounting major, right, in college?
Correct, yeah.
And it seems like, again, from my perspective, that's not really the avenue. Maybe that is your day job, but that's not really what you would like to be doing in the long run, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of passion behind accounting. Go figure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing I've also noticed too, I don't want to say you're necessarily a traveling nomad, but you're out in Colorado now, right?
Yeah, I am.
What brought you out to that area and maybe any other places you've been?
Yeah. So, gosh, I mean, I feel like I should take it back to kind of when we last were like friends, because we were good friends. We were roommates. And then I remember hanging out and I met Alicia and we hung out. We had a couple hangouts. And then once I got my own room, it was kind of like we parted ways. But like you said, we kept up on Instagrams. This technology makes it really easy to stay in touch. So, I finished out my senior year at Western doing the accounting stuff. I graduated in 2019 and I basically stayed in Bowling Green for 2 years, our college town. I stayed, I worked at Fruit of the Loom as an accountant.
Right, the underwear company.
Yep. Good old whitey tighties. So I was an accountant for the first 2 years out of college. I was kind of transitioning from being a student to just being a working class adult, if you will. And 2020 came around, and obviously 2020 was a fun year. And that's when my the company, Fruit of the Loom, they put me on furlough, and then I got put on remote work. And I was already hesitant about the accounting stuff. I wasn't crazy about it. Even in my senior year, I was like, dang, I'm not sure if I'm going to really love this when I get out of college. And then I got into the job, and I was pretty much let down from day one. I remember very vividly like getting settled into my like cubicle. They're like, here's your space, like this is your desk. And I just remember the fluorescent lights hitting me and sitting in a chair. I had 3 monitors, and it was spreadsheets galore. I mean, it was spreadsheets on spreadsheets on spreadsheets, man. And I just remember being really like, okay, I've got to like pivot from here. I've got to commit to this, because I didn't want to be one of those new college graduates that was considered a job hopper. I didn't want to give up on it. I wanted to give it a true effort. So I worked it for a year. And then 2020 happened, which was kind of a blessing in disguise, in that they furloughed me, because I was like miserable at my job. And then I was like laid off, and I was kind of happy about it. It was kind of twisted in a way.
I feel like a lot of people, for the most part, even if they loved what they were doing, and I had just gotten my first job at that point too. I graduated in fall of 19, began at iHeart in Louisville in January of 2020, was there for 2 months, and that was it for once I got furloughed in March of 2020. And I was, again, out of anything for about half a year at that point. But again, you mentioned blessing in disguise. Whenever there was weirdness to it, because again, I wasn't even fully acclimated to, being in the real world, that type of thing. Right. So kind of getting to not have to immediately grow up, I guess, and get to still enjoy. I don't want to say I don't know the best way to phrase it is, but the pleasures of our youth, I guess, might be the way to put it. That was definitely part of the blessing in disguise during those early COVID months, I feel like.
So when 2020 happened, were you in school still, or were you?
So I graduated fall of 19, and then wife and I, Alicia, we were supposed to get married in April of 2020. We ended up, because once COVID really began, mid-March to the end of March, we kind of realized things were shutting down. We're like, we need to adjust something in some way, shape, or form. We ended up pushing our wedding up to do something very small, not necessarily private. We had some immediate family members and stuff around. We ended up doing that on March 21st instead of what would have been April 4th. And from there, she moved in with me. We lived in Hillview, Kentucky, which is just south of Louisville, basically a Louisville suburb. And we had never lived with each other at that point. And so that was, not only were we getting used to being married with each other, we were getting used to living with each other. And then I was out of a job. She was teaching from home in the apartment, the online NTI, whatever it was called. And it was, everybody went through adjustments during that time, but that's a lot to have happen in a very short time frame, I feel like.
That is a lot of life. A lot of life. A lot of moving pieces all at once. It is. Wow, so we basically graduated the same year. I didn't realize that, because I graduated in May of 2019. And so
okay, yeah, wow.
What year?
Go ahead.
What year were you when we moved in together? Was that your sophomore?
When I moved into Western, I did a full year at Elizabethtown Community and Technical College. And then at that point, I'd also had some credits from high school that followed me along into college as well. So by the time I ended up graduating an entire semester ahead of when I was supposed to, I think is what it was. So had it not been for the early graduation, I would have been, mashed up into the group of 2020 graduates who had to figure out how to do it online, I guess, and finish their college career that way.
I guess that checks out, because I was a 5th-year senior, because I did a double major and I took a semester off for an internship. So I guess that checks out. Wow. So we were both kind of experiencing 2020 in very similar life stages, I guess, being finished with college and transitioning into this adult world. But I guess to pick up my story, because you asked kind of how I've been traveling. Yeah. The pandemic really opened my eyes to just the traditional format of work was really not for me. The traditional format, I just remember when I got put on remote work, I was on salary at my job and I got put on remote work. And I was like, okay, I'm working from home. I'm going to just complete my task. Like, I'm going to just be done with my work as quickly as possible. And I could do all of a day's work as an accountant in about 2.5 hours. And then the rest of the day, I'd have to sit there and just pretend to be working and just pretend to be working. Like, and it really just illuminated like, wow, I'm really inefficient with my effort and time in this job. And it's like, even if I'm really efficient, what does that mean? They're just going to give me more work that I'm not passionate about. And it was like, I realized when I was in the office how much wasted time, how much extra fat time, like fat on the meat, like of time that's just, I'm not using it wisely or productively. Because in the office, you'd kind of space out your work. You'd be like intentionally inefficient because you're like, oh, I'm going to be here for 8 hours. I want to have something to do in the afternoon. I'll like take my time with this. I'll go for a walk around the corporate office. I'll talk to Shannon. I'll catch up with Tracy. It just realized like, wow, this is not the best use of my time and effort. And so at the time, my roommate, his name's Jake, we were living in Bowling Green. I was working remotely. This is 2020, the year where the pandemic's happening. And my good roommate, Jake, was like, he graduated with sales and marketing. And he's talking to me about this internship, this apprenticeship, this sales apprenticeship that he's going to go do in Austin, Texas. And I'm like, that sounds pretty interesting. Like, you're going to go. Well, I was like, what are you going to go sell? Like, what are you going to go do? He's like, I'm going door to door. And I'm going to Austin, Texas to sell smart home security systems during a pandemic. And I'm like, okay, like, good luck, man. Like, let me know how that goes type thing. And I guess long story short, Jake went out to Austin in May of 2020 and he did this sales apprenticeship for about 3 months. And he came back home to Bowling Green and he had really good things to say about his experience. He said he really enjoyed sales, that he learned a ton of people skills, soft skills, communication skills. He made great friends. He made pretty good money for
And it sounded
working.
like you weren't really expecting any of that when he decided to do something.
I wasn't because Jake, at the time, Jake was kind of a more introverted, quieter person. And I would be lying if I said I wasn't skeptical on how well he'd be able to go sell door to door, because selling door to door sounds, by itself, it just sounds like a really difficult job.
Yeah.
And so I was a little surprised that he came back and he had very positive things to say. And that just got the wheels turning of, I'm not crazy about this accounting stuff. Like, what if I just tried something new? And then, fast forward 6 months to 2021, and I'm basically flying out to Arizona with Jake to do what's called a sales blitz. A sales blitz is like a week or two where you travel to a new area and you blitz the area. You work for like 2 weeks and sell directly, door to door. And so this was my first like experience doing door to door. And I remember the difficulty of the job was such a pleasant contrast to how easy my accounting job was. Like the accounting job just felt so unmotivating, unchallenging. I like really desired it, illuminated that I really desired like a true challenge, and I wanted competition in my job. I wanted there to be just more. I wanted my job to require more of me. And so anyways,
Let me ask you this real quick. Were you a part? I remember at some point, I don't remember if this was more post-pandemic or maybe around the time frame that you're talking about, but would you put yourself in that group that was a part of the quiet quitters? I remember that being a thing a couple of years back where people were subtly, the jobs that they were in, they weren't happy with, and instead of just outright quitting or doing something to get fired, they would just stay in one place until they found a new avenue to get to where they really wanted to be.
Oh yeah, dude. Day one, I quit quietly in my head, like, but I got to the cubicle, dude. It was before that was even like a real thing. But dude,
Okay.
I had silently quit very early on. But yeah, I know what you're referring to. I remember reading a lot of like blog articles about quiet quitting, and I feel like my experience isn't that unique in that I think a lot of young adults go through this phase in their life where they're struggling or finding their way in the work world, where they want to find this balance of what works for them, what gives them meaning, what drives them, what pays them well. It's like it's not the easiest thing to graduate college and figure out how to be a working class adult. I think it takes some fumbling around. So I don't think I'm necessarily unique
And
in
you and
that
I are really
sense.
both a part of the generation that I feel like it was really pounded into our heads that you have to go to college in order to make a decent living, that type of thing.
hmm It was always like I remember being in elementary school and pretty much thinking like, "Well, I'm going to college." Like I just kind of knew from such a small age that it would be something that I would do, and that was almost required. I didn't really question if it was something that I should or shouldn't do. It was like I'm going to do this. Um, but I do think I'm unique in that I jumped ship so abruptly from, I went from corporate accounting to basically the wild west of direct sales, where in my job now, direct sales, I'm technically self-employed. I'm basically a contractor, and so I don't have any formal structure of a job. And so I really think I did a full 180 in that sense, going from a very standardized corporate rigid accounting position to the wild west of direct sales. And I think that might be unique. But anyways, when I got into sales, I was able to travel. It was basically a traveling sales position. It allowed me to move out of Bowling Green. We did our first summer selling in Nashville. So that was a very like easy bridge as a move, just to
Yeah.
go from Bowling Green down to Nashville. And lived in Nashville for about a year. I was still basically test running the sales job, test running it in a sense. But I got through the first summer selling. I did really well. I learned a lot, kind of all the same things that Jake had told me. And that's when I was like, I'm going to do this. Like, this is going to be my new career path, if you will. It just afforded me so much time off. And I realized that that's really what I am motivated by. Not so much money. It's not so much that I want to make a lot of money. I want to have flexibility and freedom to pursue my creative passions, to pursue things that I'm interested in. So for me, it was kind of like figuring that out. I feel like I figured that out pretty early on. I think there's some people that'll work a job that they don't like for maybe 5 or 10 years before they come to this kind of, I need to make a change. I knew right away that this wasn't bringing me peace or happiness, and this wasn't fulfilling me. There was no meaning, and I just felt very driven to change that. And I'm surprised that I found it so quickly on the thing that I pivoted to right away. I thought I might have to stumble through a few more positions or jobs to figure it out. But yeah, so fast forward, let's just bring it up to how I'm in Colorado. Basically lived in Nashville for a year selling. Then we moved to Savannah, Georgia to sell for a summer. And then after that point, Asia and I, my fiance now,
Okay.
you didn't.
Congrats.
Yeah, thanks, man. Dude, it's fun to be a guest on a podcast because you don't have to like think about all the production side or the narrative or the audience.
So I've never been a guest on a podcast that was like not something that I was already technically affiliated with, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like with the Hoosier Illustrated stuff that I do, I've guested on one of our other podcasts that's also on that website. So again, it's not like this where it's just kind of out of the blue, out of nowhere type of thing. But I know exactly what you're talking about, because whenever you're in that spot where you can just sit there and and not have to worry about the different bells and whistles and what's going to have to happen afterward. How's it going to come across, that type of thing. It is so comfortable being in that.
Yeah.
And I love the hosting aspect of it, but it is nice to kind of get the other side of it on occasion too.
Sure. Well, now I'm in Colorado, and I'm engaged, and I'm happy, and I'm in sales, and that kind of brings us to the traveling side. But this is your podcast. I'm curious, where do you want to take it, John?
So one thing that I'm super interested in specifically is the Gimme the Keys aspect. So obviously you started your own podcast about 9 months ago, right? November, I think I saw.
Yes, that's exactly right.
I've been experimenting with a few different things over the course of the last few years. I've done different sports shows, sports podcasts, whatever it may be. Me, my friend Dustin Schutte and Mitchell Page began this Out of Touch a little over a year ago. I guess it was late July, early August of 2023. And so our timelines, at least with doing this whole podcast experiment, if you will, are sort of similar. Your format, though, is something that really interests me. And again, I've not seen a ton of episodes. And I said this earlier, I believe it was before we were recording. But one thing that really, whenever I noticed what you were doing, there were things that automatically intimidated me. Because one thing I love about with your show, with the few things I've taken in with it, is that you're very vulnerable with yourself, and you're not afraid to basically just talk about what's going on in your head. And there's a lot of things that I can relate to. I'm sure that other people can relate to as well, with the fact that, like, for example, I was talking about just seeing like your thumbnails, being worried that your production might be better than mine, whenever this is something that maybe that, because I went to school to do broadcasting and be in this world of mass media and try to make a living out of doing it, there was a fear when I saw what you were doing. I was like, if this is better than, like, if I think this is better than mine, then am I wasting my time doing my own thing, if that makes sense? But I will say this, when I finally decided to dive into a couple different things, that's not the impression I got at all. And I do think a lot of that, just from the few things that I heard, I really love, first of all, and I do feel like I'm kind of going all over the place with my thoughts here. And I think I'm okay with that, because one thing I've learned from specifically your stream of consciousness type stuff, and again, it's definitely something that's unique, but whenever you do those things, I feel like it's you exploring the troubles of your own mind and realizing the things that hold you back, because it's things that not only you experience, but I experience them. I feel like humans in our everyday lives all experience those different types of things, but many times we're afraid to take the necessary steps forward because we're so worried about comparing ourselves to other people rather than worrying about what we're actually doing to better ourselves. I hope all of that came full circle the way that I explained all of that.
Yeah, when you said that you were worried that it might be better, or intimidated that it might be better, that's such a real thing. Like, that's vulnerable of you to say that, because that's such a real thing that I could relate to if I was in your shoes. I could see that. Yeah, man. I mean, the podcast, it was very interesting to start it, because I didn't really know what it was going to be or why I was even really doing what I was doing when I started. So it does have that kind of exploratory aspect of it, in just the simple sense that it was like a personal experiment almost of using this technology, using the podcast as a format to think and a format to express myself. And it started that way. And I feel like as it's gone on, I feel like I've imposed these rules upon myself, or these formats upon the show, to make it more of a regular show. But it's so interesting to me that you say that you appreciate that aspect of it, that is very introspective and kind of unfolding in this very organic way. That's interesting to me that you gave that praise.
Oh, and because I see it, my favorite podcast to listen to, and I'm not like somebody who, I'm very picky, I guess is the best way to say it, about the different things that I consume, just because, like everybody, I feel like you have to use your time as wisely as you can. You can't just consume every little thing. But what I've always appreciated is guys like Theo Vaughn, for example. And I know that like that's not something that's completely out of left field. He's a very popular podcaster. But one thing, especially if you listen to his really old shows, it seems like from the get-go, he is very comfortable not only being himself, but he's very comfortable with awkward silence. He's very comfortable with just kind of letting things come out of his mouth. And again, with there is some sense of awareness, because you can't just say anything that's on your mind, of course. There is some boundary that you kind of have to be aware of in some way, shape, or form when you're doing something like this. But I think that's one thing that I've always found myself striving to do, is being comfortable in uncomfortable situations, because doing anything where you're behind a microphone, or maybe you're giving a presentation, whatever it may be, anything like that, no matter how good at it you may be, I think there's always a sense of uncomfortability whenever you're putting yourself out there, maybe in ways that maybe the average, not that I'm not an average human being, but that most people who don't take on something like this wouldn't want to do. And so you almost feel like you're trying to take that leap, but at the same time, you don't really know what you're leaping toward. I know I'm kind of exploring off into a whole bunch of different avenues here, but again, similar to the way that the shows of yours that I've listened to, it just kind of feels like, well, here again, this is me hitting that, I guess not writer's block, but more of like a podcaster's block, if that even makes sense, because I'm trying to, you try to round your thoughts around, and then there are moments like what I just had where you start to be aware that you're in an awkward situation, and then it just halts you right in the middle of your tracks. And again, I'll just let you jump right in before I run myself further into the ground.
Well, I think this is, it's difficult to communicate and think clearly. And I feel like with the overflow of media that we get on Instagram, that we get on YouTube, this pristine, high quality, perfectly edited content, we're fed these great pieces of production. And then as you and I guess being the common man, or that, the average guy, when we do this, we realize, oh, there's actually, it's very interesting to be on the other side of the microphone, or the other side of the production, where you're the producer, the creator, and you realize, oh, there's a lot of thought that goes into it. There's actually, it's pretty difficult to follow a train of thought. It's pretty difficult to be really expressive. It's pretty difficult to really connect with somebody over a piece of technology. It's not something that's natural. Like you and we're talking, I can see your face. I see your beautiful face right here. And it's like we are communicating, but it's not a natural way to communicate. You're in your house behind your monitors. I'm in Colorado behind we're talking through the technology. It's a little clunky, and I think it takes time to get used to this. And yeah, I mean, everyday conversations are not all pristine. We say, we stutter, we lose our train of thought. And that's part of the skill that I think I really love working on, or the skill that I love cultivating through making videos, through making podcasts, is I'm figuring out, I'm like running through the narrative in my mind and thinking all these raw thoughts. They're not coming out ready. And I know you mentioned Theo Vaughn. I mean, I think he's at a point where he's gotten comfortable with just his thoughts flowing to him, and they're coming out as they hit his brain. And it's very entertaining because he's such a funny human. Like, he's just so naturally funny. But yeah, I mean, podcasting is, I want to ask you, I know you studied broadcasting. And I
Which is
remember when
it's a weird phrase in and of itself, studying broadcasting. I don't know why.
right. I do remember being in the dorms and telling you, like, man, you have a great voice. Like, you should really be like on air. And I think had you done any broadcasting work in 2017
Man,
or was
no.
it?
So the one thing I'd always been told, from you, and I think that this was kind of the initial drive that took me down this path, was people in, I guess it maybe started late middle school into high school. People like I just had a deeper voice than the average, 8th grader or 9th grader, whatever it may be. And I remember being a freshman, by the way, and I was switching school systems at the time. So I was unfamiliar with pretty much everybody who was in the high school, even though high school in general is already an unfamiliar thing for a brand new freshman. But I remember my very first class, people thought that I was faking my voice, like my deep voice, because it was so, and not that I have like something that's completely, unique. I mean, I guess in some ways everyone has their own unique voice in general, but it's just one of those things where the more you hear things like, oh man, you've got such a great radio voice or something, you start to kind of realize, okay, this must be what I'm, and when you're young, you don't think of it like this. This must be what I'm called to do, or this must be what I'm meant to do in some way, shape, or form. And so from that point forward, you start to think, oh, well, what can I actually use this for? What am I good at? What do I know? How can I enjoy this? And the initial thought was like doing play-by-play and that type of stuff, because I always love watching sports. I've never gone down that avenue. Maybe it is something I would explore in the future. I haven't really thought about it much, so maybe I won't. But one thing that I always got pleasure and enjoyment in, and this is really before the age of like the podcast boom. Like there wasn't podcasts left and right from everybody. Like back in the day, I feel like everybody was starting a band. Now everybody's starting a podcast. But back then for me, in middle of high school, really going into early college, I just loved listening to different radio shows, whether it be sports talk shows, just different topical type things. And I was like, you know what? I think there's something in me that can learn how to do this. And I don't know what level of success I can achieve doing it, but if I can make at least a living off of it and at the same time enjoy it, then I think it'll be worth my time. And so I didn't do any real true broadcasting in any way, shape, or form until I got to WKU. Whenever I did, I guess I joined our radio team and I wasn't like the host, obviously, right off the bat, but I would, go on for a couple of minutes and talk about one specific thing with whoever was driving the show that day. And, the longer you go to these different shows that they're doing, the further you can move up the ladder after people graduate and that type of thing. So just finding different ways to cut your teeth in it and really finding out if it's meant for you, and getting the enjoyment out of it. That was the first part of it. And then doing that, because weirdly enough, most people who go through the broadcasting path at Western, at least when I was there, I feel like they would experiment with multiple different things. But I had no desire to be behind a camera. And I've heard you say that too, at least with your podcast. So I did not want to have anything to do with the TV aspect of it, which a lot of people told me, like, you better, kind of watch, maybe you should, that type of thing. But I was very adamant, like, nope, don't be behind a camera. So I was like, I'm going to hone all the way in on radio. I'm going to make this work. I was going to manifest it into existence. And I guess before I go any further, though, I do want to stop on the camera tidbit. I do want to ask you, what makes you uncomfortable about it too? Because I want to share something specifically about what I do. Whenever I'm doing my solo segments, not for this show, but when I'm doing my sports show on Monday, really throughout the week, one thing that I've learned I don't like is whenever I'm recording and I can see myself talking to myself in the monitor. So I'll throw my show notes up in front of my screen so I don't have to look at myself while I'm talking, which again, maybe that's normal. Maybe that's weird, but that's just one way I've learned to cope with dealing with being on a camera whenever it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think it's distracting, and I think it makes me self-conscious, and I think it blocks me from truly, I guess, thinking freely or flowing out of a natural state of consciousness. when I first started the YouTube channel, they were just a voiceover. I had like a backdrop, I guess a screensaver-esque visual, and then I would just record my podcast. And it was so fun not having the visual camera feedback, because it allowed me to be a lot more imaginative. It allowed me to, it was almost like a crossover from a podcast to like voiceover to like voice acting almost. Like when I first started, I'm like, this is so cool, because there's no camera, you can change the listening experience. You could alter your voice. You could just, it almost caused you to speak in a way that was more descriptive in imagery.
Yeah.
And then because you have to. Yeah. And then when I started doing, I want to say it was about January, where I was like, okay, I've got to make this like, how can I make this more of a traditional, like watchable podcast? And it was like, I had to start doing the video. And then that changed once I started recording myself. It seemed like it started changing into like a presentation. And I remember thinking, I got to get more strategic about what I'm going to talk about. And I think I was just, I don't want to say it became less fun, but it definitely changed my like process of making videos, and the voice, like the narrative that would come out of me was different because the camera. And I think it's probably best for the long run, because you don't want to just be like hiding in your closet recording like weird podcasts. You want to be who you are. And so I feel like I'm in this growth of speaking and being who I am and owning all of who I am, visually, audio wise. But the camera did throw a little wrench in the system. It definitely changed the dynamic. What about you?
One thing that helped me get comfortable initially with the camera, I guess, was really a multitude of different things. So before I was doing what I'm doing now, not this podcast, but the 3 shows a week for Hoosier Illustrated, I was working for a guy who I was his producer. He was the host, and it was the same kind of setup that we have right now. He was in his place, I was here, 2 different cameras, that type of thing. But I usually have my camera off. There'd be moments where I would maybe have to take over the show for him if something had, gone wrong on his end. And so instead of people, I guess, looking at this black screen, like if I hit this right now, you just see a little white circle, and it's super awkward and just dumb to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And getting comfortable, really just getting thrust into situations that maybe you didn't know you were going to be involved in. That's something that, even though it may be kind of nerve-wracking in the immediate, I do think it's better than being told like, hey, I'm going to be gone for a week. I need you to do these next 5 days solo, and then kind of letting the anxiety of it all fester, and instead just doing it without thinking. Because I'm a textbook overthinker, as I'm sure you've kind of realized throughout this recording, the amount of times I've just gone down one path and maybe veered in one direction and then gone to the next without 100% completing my thought. But at the same time, like, that's also kind of the beauty of all of this, because it really, podcasting in general really is, I think you might have even said this earlier, it's just a strand of our thought, and wherever it takes us, that's where it ends up. And some people may find enjoyment in that. Other people's may find it unlistenable. And I think it's also very easy to get caught up in negative feedback or comments, that type of thing. Because you may get, I think this is very common with a lot of things, not just in media, but you may get 5 or 6 nice things said to you. But if you get one thing said that it may not even be that negative of a thing, it just may be a very minor criticism, it is very easy for me to get completely wrapped up in, okay, I need to fix this. How do I fix it?
Oh yeah, dude. I remember the first time someone left like a negative comment. It was the only negative comment I ever got left on a YouTube video. And I still remember it to this day. Like I just cannot forget it. Out of all the people that gave me thumbs up, dude, love this podcast, like one person, they were just like, man, podcasting's not for you, buddy. And I was like, oh, like,
see, that's not even. I feel like that's worse than what I've been told. Like the most recent thing I've seen, and again, wasn't on this. It was on the sports stuff that I do. Somebody pointed out, they're like, you say obviously a whole bunch. And I don't know that I've done that a lot today, but it is something that since I've seen it, I feel like I'm very aware of when that word comes out of my mouth. And I think the most difficult thing to do with a comment like that is when you catch yourself doing it again, not to get caught up in the moment when you're recording and just move on from it. I feel like you don't, there has to come a point, I guess, where you feel like you shouldn't have to address it. By the way, I feel like we're getting very meta on this show, and I hope that's okay.
I love it.
I have learned that whenever we're doing Out of Touch, whenever it's me, Dustin, and Mitchell, there are a lot of times where maybe it's not about podcasting specifically. It may just be about our daily lives, and it just ends up going down a very, maybe it's not that odd of a direction. Maybe I just tell myself it's an odd direction, or something tells me it's odd because there's that inkling inside of me that tells me that there's no point in doing this. As I've heard you address before. So,
well, I love this side of the conversation because I'm interested in your perspective as from a creation standpoint. So these things are really interesting to hear from you. I feel like podcasting is refining your skills as a communicator. And I think part of it, when I started my podcast, I didn't want to edit anything. I wanted it to be very natural. And it was very exciting, the idea that I couldn't edit anything, because it was like, I'm just going to, it was really liberating to just put my voice out there. And I feel like that's a point that it seems like a lot of people are already at, because you look at all the content that's on YouTube.
Yeah.
But as an individual, if you've never done it, it is very liberating to take that leap over and say, I'm going to put my voice out there. And so I think that's something, I think this is useful for anyone else that's going to watch or listen, that they realize that on the other side of you taking that step into creating or producing or putting yourself out there, that there's a lot to learn on the other side of that. And there's a lot of growth that can be had from that. It's not, and it's exciting because there's something at risk. You could be made fun of. You could be ignored. You could realize, oh, great, no one even cares about what I'm saying. So there's some risk involved, which makes it a very exciting and fulfilling thing. And so I think it's just really cool to hear your side of things. I want to ask you, this channel here, Out of Touch, how did this come about?
So the channel itself has gone through a few different iterations. It started off as just my name because I was putting different things on here before it was primarily the Out of Touch podcast. But Dustin Schutte, one of the other two guys who are usually on this show, Dustin Schutte is somebody that I met through one of my former jobs, where he was a frequent guest that I just kind of made a pretty good connection with over the years of working with him and stuff like that. And there were times whenever, again, like I mentioned earlier, filling in for a segment or two and just chatting back and forth with him, we noticed we would typically kind of veer off into not the unknown, but we would just kind of go down avenues that if the regular host had been there, would not have been traveled down, that type of thing. And so whenever go ahead.
Would you get off topic? Would you try to stick to topics, or how would you format the podcast?
So then again, this is before even Out of Touch happened. This was actually on a sports show. What we would do is we would end up talking about things that maybe they're somewhat within that sports realm, but we would also we wouldn't be afraid to talk about the more topical or goofy side of things that maybe like your hard-hitting news guy wouldn't really want to go down that path, that type of thing. And a lot of people found those segments fairly entertaining. And then over the course of doing those segments a number of times, it kind of turned into, eventually we were like, you know what, let's try this long format on our own. and maybe we'll bring along Mitchell Page with us too, because he would step in with us from time to time. And like, let's just talk about our lives. Let's talk about things that maybe most people would be uncomfortable talking about behind a camera, and we'll see where it goes. And the name Out of Touch came from people, maybe not necessarily people, but I would say commenters on the previous show where we would do those kind of off-topic segments. They would usually, it came from their reactions, I guess. We're like, you know what? We're kind of different. Let's just give this podcast a very different name to kind of make it seem like we're just going to be a little bit out there. And again, we don't talk about things that are always, out of left field or whatever it may be. But the Out of Touch name in particular is more so all three of us realizing that there is so much more, because we're all in our 20s and 30s. I'm 27. Mitchell, I believe, just turned 30, and then Mitchell's about 34, 35. But all of us are still trying to, I guess, get more in touch with growing as humans. And, not to make the pun there, but that's kind of what I've learned that this podcast has ended up being, at least through the first year of its existence. And it's also just kind of more so just a journal for us. And that may sound a little cringe to some people, but however long we end up doing it, ultimately, this will be something that we can look back on and, I don't know, maybe show family someday. Maybe we wouldn't do something like that, but it'll still always be there, hopefully, to just kind of see where we were at certain points in our lives. Like Mitchell had a baby a few months ago, like seeing the episodes of the journey from him going, like finding out that his wife was pregnant and then leading up to his baby being born. That is something cool, like that we would check in on every episode or two leading up to that point. And then now he's got the baby. Like, that's just something I feel like he will be able to remember in that type of thing. So
I love it. I love that. It is like documenting, and it is fun. It's fun to do. And you're growing as a human. You're growing as a communicator. You're creating something. It's fulfilling. And that's why I like making videos, is it's a new frontier of creativity that I'm learning, and that I feel like I'm picking up at a rate that's pretty fast. Like, every video I try and learn a new skill, or I feel like I'm understanding this YouTube thing a little bit more and more. And it's not like my channel's blowing up or anything, but just that incremental progress and growth is just so attractive. And I love that about making videos. I love that about podcasting. And I just have this deep belief that there's only good that can come from continuing to do it. I don't think there's any downside. I don't feel like it's wasted time,
Yeah. Let me ask you this then, because one thing that's always intrigued me, and I know I've mentioned Colorado a couple of times and how you've gotten there, but when you record maybe an episode on your balcony or something, or maybe you're just out in nature doing something outside as opposed to being behind the screen like we are right now, do you feel, is there a different type of vibe that goes into a recording like that versus your traditional show like we're doing right now?
Yeah, it's more capturing shots and capturing angles. It's more focused on the actual shooting side of it, where the podcast is more of the psychological side of things. So I like that contrast of the two. I want to say it's within the last couple months, 2 or 3 months, I've started 2 different playlists on Give Me the Keys. So I have Give Me the Keys as just the traditional podcast where I'm in the studio and it's going to be topical. And then I have a playlist called Nature Now, which is really just a reason for me to get out and explore and capture all the beauty that's around me in Colorado and to document. I'm not going to live in Colorado forever. So, 2 or 3 years from now when I'm not here, I can go back and look at those videos, and it's a way to capture the moment. And then I have a Note to Self, which is a playlist that takes me back to when I first started, where there's no camera. It's more of a stream of consciousness where I'm not thinking about Is the topic good today? Do I sound right? Do I look good? Is my outfit cool? Does this colors look good? It's just this very natural stream of thoughts in my head. It's very therapeutic in that sense. So I like that I've had these 3 buckets now, and it's fun to play around with those. And it gives me just more chance to experiment. I feel like I'm in a very early stage as a video creator. I'm less than a year. And so I look at this as a skill set that I could grow for the next, 5-10 years. And I have that deep belief because when we first met, I was just on the cusp of starting to write and starting to make music back in 2017. I was just on the start of these creative passions, and I see how much progression can be had there. And those two passions, the music and the writing, I feel like that almost allowed me to transition into this podcast stage very organically and naturally, because podcasting, in a sense, is the combination of writing and audio, music. Combine those two, and that's what a podcast is. So now, as a podcaster, I'm interested in this frontier of video editing and video creation, and so it's just such a fun thing to learn and be engaged in. I love it.
Where did Gimme the Keys come from, the name?
Gimme the Keys came from, it's actually an inside joke with a friend that came out here. A couple friends came out, and we were at Red Rocks. Do you know who Mark Rebier is? Have you heard of Mark Rebier? Mark Rebier is like a DJ, music artist. He's very bold. He's just has a lot of zeal. He's a very interesting character, and he improvises a lot of his music. His claim to fame was that during the pandemic, he would set up a camera and DJ and have like really funny like raps or voiceover that he would do. And it's just very creative person, very bold, like I said, outgoing person, performer really. And so anyways, we're at this concert, we're all having a great time, and my buddy Isaiah was starting to get a little overwhelmed by all the people there, and he wanted to leave. And he looked over at me and said, "AZ, give me the keys." And he was just so serious. He was so serious. And we all 3 of us just started laughing our butts off about that. It's like one of those things where you're hanging out with your friends and someone says one line and you guys laugh about it. And then the whole hangout, the whole trip, you guys just keep bringing it up and laughing about it more. And so Give Me the Keys just came out of that. Like we said, they were out here for about 3 or 4 days, and we said, "Give me the keys" probably 100 times. And then when they left, I don't know, just the inception, it was time. Like I had the idea of like, the time is now. Like I need to, why haven't I started a podcast? Why haven't I put my voice out there? It's out of fear. And it's like, I just want to be here now and just give me the keys. Like I'm taking the keys, give them to me. They're mine. I've got them, and we're going somewhere. That's kind of
I like it.
The keys started.
I didn't get to, I should have asked this earlier, but you mentioned you're engaged. When are you getting married?
We've had a long engagement. We're getting married. We're planning it. We're in the midst of planning it. Next summer, we're looking at the date June 14th in Kentucky. So,
and you're from like the northern Kentucky area, right? You went to like Ryle or something?
Very close. I went to Simon Kenton.
Okay.
Northern.
Same area.
Yeah, very, very close, very close. But yeah, like the greater Cincinnati, Kentucky side. So that's home. My parents are still there, and I go back at least once or twice a year. So, cool. And where are you at nowadays? Louisville?
So I'm still in the same area in which I grew up. Once I moved home from Bowling Green, I mentioned I lived in Hillview for a little while. That was, my wife and I were only there for just maybe a little over a year. And then we bought a house in Mount Washington, which is really just about 25 minutes from where we were living previously. And it's the town where I went to high school. And this was not by any sort of plan. I feel like most people say they don't want to live in the same place in which they went to school, that type of thing. I was never the type of person to say that. but at the same time, I never really thought that I would just end up back here. I feel like, especially in my field, most people end up moving really far away, or they kind of move around a bunch. But I would say my wife, with her being kind of very family oriented, and not that I'm not, but she's very attached with her family. And again, to my family who may be listening, not that I'm not attached to you guys, but her family's very large. Like there's always a whole bunch of different gatherings they have here, not even just holidays, just regular times where they meet up. And I think I kind of knew from the get-go, I was like, if I can make this work where we stay close to home, then I don't want us to have to move and that type of thing. Not that it won't ever happen to work out in that manner, but so far through nearly 5 years, I guess it'll be 5 years in next March, then we've made it work so far where we haven't had to live far from home, old home, I should say.
That's great. Congrats on, you said you bought a house, right?
Yeah, we've lived here since 20, time is, I feel like I'm usually decent with how long things go. I guess it was 2021. Yeah, we've had our house for over 3 years, which I feel like we haven't even lived here that long. It happens though. Post-COVID time in general feels like it flies by.
Yeah, I've lived in Colorado for 2 years as of this week, which is insane. It's gone by incredibly fast. Too fast. I can't believe I've lived here for 2 years. I remember when I first got out here, and I remember like tracking the week, like, wow, I've lived in Colorado for 2 weeks. I've lived in Colorado for 4 weeks. And now it's like 2 years later. But
what part of Colorado?
I am in Colorado Springs, which is about an hour south of Denver. Okay. So Colorado as a state, really kind of in the middle, and just along the Front Range is where the Rocky Mountains start. So everything to my west this way, it's all mountainous, incredibly beautiful. That's where Pikes Peak is. That's the point outside of Colorado Springs. And then everything to my east is back towards Kansas. It's basically the Great Plains. So Colorado Springs is a pretty big town. It's got 500,000 people, and it sits right nestled at the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains. Great place. I love it.
I've never been further west than, I guess, either Texas or St. Louis. I don't know which one's more west. I know they're kind of on that same line, but I'm definitely, the wanderlust has hit me in the last couple of years, and I'm sure I'll make my way out in that direction at some point.
Yeah, I encourage you to get out here, man. It's a beautiful place. It's amazing.
Well, this has been really awesome, and and I'm sure you probably felt the same way. I had no idea how this would go. I was confident that it would be enjoyable because I just listening to again, I know I've mentioned this a couple of times already. Once I listened to a few of your different, whether it be the streams of consciousness or even one of the episodes themselves, I was like, okay, this is going to be a really easy conversation because I could just tell we're both along the same lines of, maybe we're not in the same points of life necessarily, but we both think about similar things. We're both trying to figure out what it really means to go about being an adult in our late 20s. Or heck, you're still in your late 20s, right? You're not 30, are you?
I'm 28.
Okay. Either way, this has been fun, and maybe we'll do it again sometime. Who knows? But I definitely enjoyed it, and I appreciate you taking an hour to do this with me.
Yeah, John, had a blast, man. Thanks for having me on.